And the adventure continues. Here we are in part 12, about to begin the coding process of getting the power-up class set up. So Logan, let's go ahead and jump over to Visual Studio Express.
And let's get started with the power-up class itself. We've already got the classes folder expanded in the Solution Explorer, so let's go in and add a new item. That new item will be a class, which I'm going to call power-up. And here we have our power-up class. Now, like we talked about briefly, we need to do some cleanup to get the class in order. And that's going to include taking the end of the namespace off, taking the unnecessary usings, taking the class itself, and making sure it extends actor. And I also want to add in some of the using statements. And for that, let me just jump over to any other actor.
Yeah, grab those XNA framework stuff.
We use framework and graphics on all of the other actors, and we'll need types from them inside of the power-up. All right. So for the power-up class itself, we can begin with the fields that power-up is going to hold.
Okay.
And the first of those are going to be the properties and reference to the time bar itself. So let's make the first two as constant integers. The first will be time bar width, which we'll set to 400, and the second integer time bar height, which we'll set to 10. Now we need that reference to an actual bar, so I'll put in a private field of type bar, which I'm going to call simply time bar. Now we need to put in fields to hold the timing settings, the active time and then the time remaining, then the respawn time. So all of these are going to be private float fields. So the first will be private float active time, then active time remaining, and since most of that's the same, I'll just copy paste the line and say that this one is active time remaining. Then we're going to have the float respawn time, and then respawn time remaining. And then that takes care of the fields. Now we need the two properties to access active time and respawn time. So both of these are going to be public properties. So we'll put in a public float for active time. And active time is just going to have a simple get and set accessor for the active time field. So get will simply return active time, and set will simply set active time. So active time equals the given value. And that's all we need for active time. I'll copy and paste the property since it's mostly the same as respawn time. Of course, changing the naming over to respawn time. And I'm going to copy and paste these fields because we need to hit the respawn time fields. Now, in the set accessor, we had talked about that setting respawn time actually needs to kick off the respawn time action, or state, if you will.
That's right.
And in order to do that, that means we need to put some time on the respawn time remaining field. So right after we set respawn time, let me jump down and let me actually restructure the set accessor, because I'm going to put more than one line inside of it. So we're not only going to set the respawn time, but we're also going to set the respawn time remaining. We'll set that to value as well. So that way, if we set the respawn time, we make sure that we turn around and use that, put that on the clock for respawn time remaining.
Very nice. All right. So now it's time to go ahead and start skeletoning in all of our methods, starting out with our constructor.
All right. For the constructor, we're going to put in a public constructor. So public power up. And for this constructor, we need to, 1, take in a texture 2D so we have something to satisfy the actor's base constructor. And 2, I want to take in a time bar color, because if we look at the fields, we've described the width and height, but not the color. So we'll actually take in the color as a parameter to the constructor. So, of course, we need first the texture 2D, which I'll call texture. And then I'm going to take in a color called time bar color. Now, of course, we want to make sure we satisfy or call the base constructor. So I'll make a call to base where we can feed it that texture we've gathered.
All right, very nice. Now let's go and get update in place.
All right, now update is just going to be an override to actor's update method. So this will be a public override where we've already picked up on update. I'll drop that in place, and I'll leave the call to base.update.
Okay. Now we've got pickup.
All right, pickup is going to be the power-up function to get pickups kicked off. It's going to be a public method, not going to return anything, and I'm going to call it pickup.
Okay, and then we've got our two protected virtual methods, activate and deactivate.
All right. So protected virtual void activate, and basically the same thing for deactivate. So protected virtual void deactivate, and that takes care of at least a skeleton of all of the methods for power-up.
Okay, so now we can go ahead and shift our attention over to the game class.
As a matter of fact, let me do a build as well.
Sure.
Make sure that I haven't
Yeah,
introduced
everything
any
should
errors.
be. Yep, good.
All right. So now going over to the game class.
Okay, so now we've got some fields that we need to add into the good old game class.
All right. So scrolling up to our fields, where I'm going to jump in right below score, and I'm going to add in a comment to note this as the time power-up section. All right. The first of which are going to we'll need a couple constant floats so that we can have a setting for the time power-up's duration and the time power-up's respawn time. So first constant float will be time power-up duration, which we'll set to a value of 3. And then another constant float for time power-up
Respawn time.
And I think there was an underscore on that, so the time power-up I think that's right.
Yeah, that's right.
Respawn time. Now, one more field, and that is a field to hold the color of the time bar for this power-up.
Right.
So I'm going to make a private color, which I'm going to call time bar color. And we'll set that to be a new color with the values of 0 for red, 128 for green, and 255 for blue.
All right. Now let's go and jump down to the textures section and add in a texture field for our time texture.
All right. I'll just copy and paste one of the existing ones and change its name. So we're going to have a texture called time texture.
All right.
And then, of course, we need to turn around and make sure we load that.
Yep.
So quick jump to load graphics content, where I can grab any of the existing lines that load in a texture and change the name over. So time texture. And then the asset we want is down here as time power-up. So we'll fill that in here. So we load in the time power-up texture asset.
All right. So at this point, a lot of stuff's actually in place. Since our power-up is an actor, its update, its draw, all that's being handled already. So really what we need to do is just, initialize a few things and we can actually see it working, or at least see it appear on the screen. So let's go ahead and turn our attention down to the begin level method.
All right. Let's scroll down. We should have our section for gameplay methods, one of those being begin level.
All right.
And we could jump in right before the player is created, and we can address the time, well, not yet a time power, but a power-up.
Right. Go ahead and create one.
Now what we want to do for the creation of the power-up is to declare a local variable here, so that we can get back to it and set things like duration, respawn time, and things like that.
Right.
So I'm going to make a variable of type power-up, and I'm going to call it time power-up. And then we can turn around and initialize that to a new power-up, and we'll give it the required texture, so time texture, and the color as time bar color. Now you will note that the type of this power-up is just power-up. In the end, we will need to change this over to an actual time power-up when we have created one.
Right.
But for now, just using the generic power-up will let us test all of the power-up's functionality. So with
this, we can go ahead and build and test.
Well, that's true. Just creating the new power-up, power-up being an actor, means it should have been dropped into that list and be ready to draw.
See it up at 0, 0, so we should see it up in the very corner.
All right, well, let's build and run and begin a new game. And look up in
there
the top
it
right
is.
corner.
Nice.
There's the time power-up.
Right now would be a good time, Logan, if we went ahead and disabled the level advancing code, so as we start testing this more and more, we're not constantly being shifted.
Since the first few levels go by so quickly, it would be a good idea to jump up to update, then into the playing section, and temporarily comment out the level change code, just so that we are always stuck on level 1 and can more closely test the time power-up.
All right, now let's go ahead and prove that we can hide our power-up by simply setting its origin to negative.
Okay. Well, we can take a newly created time power-up variable, set its position to be equal to negative its origin. So time power up dot origin.
Very nice.
And let's see if that has indeed moved it off screen. If we run and begin a game,
Hey, it's gone.
Now we have no time power up visible in the top left corner of the screen.
Very nice. All right, well, while we're inside of the begin level method, let's go ahead and set up our respawn time and active time for our time power up item here so that everything is set up internally for the counting or the timing system.
Okay, so we could take this time power up and also set its respawn time. We'll set that to time power up respawn time, and its active time to time power up duration.
Excellent.
So that way we have valid things held, and with respawn time specifically, we actually have it kicked off and ready to begin counting down, because of course this property also sets the respawn time remaining.
And you know what? With it kicked off and ready to begin counting down, let's go ahead and switch over to the power up class, and let's start putting a little bit of code inside of update to make that respawn time remaining countdown, and let's see if we can make it a spawn so that we actually see the power up appear on screen.
Okay, well here we've got the update method, so let me jump in before the call to base update, and let's put in a check. And this check will be if this dot respawn time remaining is greater than 0. So if there is some time on the clock for respawn time. If that is indeed the case, then we need to decrement that time. So we'll turn around and say that respawn time remaining minus equals game time dot elapsed game time dot total seconds.
And then we'll need to go ahead and change it over to a float.
Right, because we'll need to cast the double over to a float, then we can use it to decrement.
Now we can immediately turn around and check to see if we've reached or gone below 0.
So then a second check to see, once again, the respawn time remaining, has it gotten to or exceeded 0, or gone below 0. And if it has indeed, then we've run out of time, and at this point it is time to spawn the power-up.
That's right.
So we spawn by making the power-up visible on screen, or taking its position and setting it to a random screen position. So we'll take game 1 and tell it to get a random screen position. We need to give it padding so that we have this actor padded well enough on screen. So, well, it being an actor means we can take its radius and feed that over as padding, and then we should have the position set up.
Excellent. And this is a perfect place to test it, because right now when you launch it and inside begin level, when we actually begin playing, we're going to set up that remaining time to be 1 second. It's going to count down, hit 0, and when it does, this update right here is going to reposition the power-up, which means it's going to move it somewhere on the screen. So we're going to see it actually appear after a second. Let's make sure that works.
All right, let's test. So jumping into a new game. So
1 second. Hey!
And look at that. The power-up spawns.
Of course, you'll notice as Logan moves over it, it doesn't get picked up. So we need to go ahead and get a little bit of code in place to make sure the player can pick it up. So that's what we'll focus on next.
All right, so to make it so that the power-up can be picked up means we need to look for the power-up and then look for a collision between the power-up and the player.
Right.
Now this will be done inside of the game class's update method. So scrolling up to update, here we have the section for when we're in the playing state. Then we're in the actors loop, looking for different kinds of actors. So I can scroll to the bottom of this section, right after cell, and let's look for power-ups. So we'll do this in the same manner as enemy and cell. I'll make a variable of type power-up, and then we'll set that to the given actor casted as a power-up. And if that's not null, so if the power-up is not equal to null, then we have a power-up and we can do that collision check. So we've found a power-up. Now we need to see if this given power-up is actually colliding with the player. So we'll do another check where we'll check actor and see if actor check collision between the power-up and the player is true, or if they're colliding. If that is indeed the case, then we can call upon the power-up's pickup method.
That's right.
So we can take our power-up and tell it to run its pickup method.
All right. So now that we have that set up...
And one thing after that, since this is a one of the further checks, I'll throw in a continue.
Yeah.
Just to follow what we've been doing with all the other collision checks.
Right.
So continue.
Sweet.
There we are.
All right. So now we can go ahead and jump over to pickup inside of the power-up class. And first thing we need to do is make sure that the power-up disappears by setting its position back to a negative origin.
Okay. So first thing inside of pickup, when this gets called, we'll set our position to be off-screen. So position will be set to negative this dot origin.
Okay. And now we need to set that active time remaining, because now technically you just picked it up. So it's become active. So we need to set the active time remaining to the active time.
So that means we need to say this dot active time remaining is equal to this dot active time.
Okay. And of course we need to make sure that we call activate.
So this dot activate, we make our call to activate, so that if any future classes implement activate, then we'll have the necessary code run.
That's right. And at this point, we should be able to test it, because we're calling pickup when we collide, or we should be, when we collide with the power-up, so we should at least see the power-up disappear.
All right, well, let's test that. We'll build, begin a game, wait for the power-up to spawn. Once it spawns, we'll run over to and collide with it, and then the power-up disappears.
Of course, it doesn't respawn because we haven't set it up yet. So let's go ahead and continue working on this, because we need that next section of code inside of update in the power-up class, which is where we're going to keep an eye on the active time remaining, and we're going to decrement it, and we're going to watch for it to go below 0.
All right. Well, here we are with update inside of the power-up class, so we can put in that check. We can see if there's any active time remaining. So if this dot active time remaining is greater than 0, then we have some active time left that needs to be decremented, which is the first thing we'll do. We'll take active time remaining decremented by the float casted game time, elapsed game time, total seconds.
Okay.
And then we have our decrement.
And then we need to turn around before we get sidetracked here like I did a few minutes ago, the implementation. Let's go ahead and, actually no. We'll come right back to this in a second. Let's go ahead and jump up to the constructor, just like I did over there. And let's go and create the time bar, because we're now in a position where we need to get the time bar showing up at the top as well.
Right, because the active time, while it decrements, it also needs to have the visual representation in the form of that time bar.
That's right.
That goes hand in hand with this active time remaining. So, to do that, we can go back and revisit the constructor and put together the time bar. And that'll begin with creating the time bar itself. So we'll say, we'll use the time bar field in order to reference it. So we can say this time bar equals a new bar, and we're going to give it a width of time bar width, a height of time bar height, and a color of this time bar color parameter. So we'll feed it time bar color, and that will create a new time bar.
Okay. Now let's go ahead and set its position so that it's centered and at the top of the screen.
Okay. So we'll set our newly created time bar. We'll set its position to be equal to a new vector 2, where x is going to be representing the center of the screen, or rather we can look at game 1's screen width, divide that by 2, and that'll give us the center of the screen. And for the y, I want it spaced just a little bit off the top of the screen, and I found that the time bar's own height worked well for an offset. So I can just plug in time bar height again, and then we should have a nice position.
Okay, now let's go ahead and set up the time bar's alignment so that it's centered.
And that's just a simple setting of time bar dot alignment set to bar alignment dot center.
All right, so let's take a look. Your if statement down and update real quick. Before we finish this off, I want to show them something. All that looks good. So yeah, let's go ahead and build real quick. Make sure everything builds well. And we can test it and show them that as soon as the game launches, we've got that time bar at 100%.
Right, because we haven't addressed the fact that, well, bars start at 100%. So
Ooh, there it
we
is.
don't have the time bar, or we have this display of the time bar before the time power-up itself spawns.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and fix that by taking the time bar percent and setting it down to 0.
So back to the constructor for a second, so we can set the time bar's percent equal to 0. And now if we build and run,
and it's gone.
Now we have no time bar. We still don't have the pickup bar because we haven't set it. We haven't picked anything up.
Yeah, but we'll fix that with this very next line of code. So let's go ahead and jump back down to update where that, yeah, right where you're working on that if statement, and let's go ahead and put the time bar's percent equal to the active time remaining divided by the active time.
All right, so here's where we'll update the time bar's percent. So we'll set the time bar percent equal to active time remaining divided by active time. So that way we get active time represented as a percent, which is something we can store in the time bar.
And that, if we test again, gives us a functioning, hang on, let's see, yep, gives us a functioning time bar.
So we should see it become visible since
Bink.
it will start out nearly at active time.
Excellent.
And then pretty much run out.
All right, very good. So now we need to go ahead and finish off that if statement where if we run out of active time, what do we do?
All right. Well, the first thing is to do the check so we can detect when that happens. So if this .active time remaining drops below or is equal to 0, then we know we've just run out of active time, so we need to deactivate and do any necessary cleanup.
Okay. So inside here, we need to take our respawn time remaining and reset that back to the respawn time, which next time through update is going to kick us back up into the top part of update here.
So let's take a look at our respawn time remaining and set that back to its full time of respawn time.
Okay.
So we're going to state we're basically waiting to spawn.
And now we'll go ahead and call on deactivate.
So make a call to deactivate so that any future code is run at the proper time, because this is the time when we've just run out of active time, so the power-up is now deactivating.
And finally, let's go ahead and take our time bar % and set it to 0 just in case there's anything left visible on the screen from it.
So let's take our time bar, set its % to be equal to exactly 0. To ensure that it is in fact invisible. And I'm going to reorder this just a little bit. I'm going to throw deactivate as the very first thing that happens, and then we'll do any necessary cleanup after that.
Looks good. And with that, Logan, that should have us in a state of demonstrating the power-up class fully functional.
Right, because we have that final link to make this act as a, I'd say, an almost complete loop, because this respawn time remaining means we go back into this state. This state finishes with this power-up spawning. We've already proven that the pickup code works, so as long as we keep picking up the time power-up, we'll now have this cycle in place.
And let's check it out.
So waiting, time power-up spawns, pick up, waiting for the time's active time to run out. It does. We wait again another second, and then it spawns. And then the cycle begins over.
Very nice. One more time.
So waiting, and then spawn, then pick up, then active, then waiting, then respawn, then pick up, then active, and it continues.
All right. And with that, is there anything else you want to add into this lesson?
I'm not seeing anything.
That was just too quick and easy.
I mean, that's handling everything it needs to do. We've got that flowchart now satisfied. We have all the elements in place, taking place. We've got the necessary code in PowerUp and in game for all this to work.
Okay. So with that, that is going to conclude part 12. Thanks a lot, guys.